Hey everyone, it's Billy Root at FIFTY8 Magazine, and welcome to my new series about the esoteric symbolism in storytelling. This series will give deeper insight into the creativity behind storytelling based upon the myth of our life force, our energy that came down and took upon itself matter. These stories are about each of us and the raising of energy and evolution back up to the crown, called enlightenment. These stories are so powerful because they speak to our subconscious and create a feeling that reminds us of who we are. And as a filmmaker myself, I've always loved the creativity and collaborative adventure of constructing a story because it's very similar to constructing personal reality. And today I will talk about the Marvel film Shang-Chi, directed by Destin Daniel Cretton. And Shang-Chi symbolizes the transmigration of the soul, the unfoldment and spiritualization of the ego intellect to the heart and intuition.
十环的传说已经流传了上千年，不论这个故事如何演变，它的主人公永远都是同一个人。有人说他的十环是火山口里捡来的，还有人说是墓穴里盗来的。他们给了他神一般的力量，也赋予了他长生不老的魔法。他本可借着十环之力来惩恶扬善，但他想要的只有征服。
And the tomb that these rings were stolen from symbolize the skull. This knowledge and process of transcending to the highest levels of enlightenment is one of letting go of the identification of the personal self. And this video is inspired by the work of Dr. David Hawkins.
When you're honest about it, you see that you love your ego. You love the juice you get out of your ego. See? Once you admit that truth, you've taken the cover off of it. You love the ego. It's your source of juice. It's the source of all the injustices, the calamities, the pains, the hatreds. Where would you be without it? You'd be stuck with the reality of the self, which doesn't buy that crap.
And the teachings of the order of Christian mystics. And my intention with this film is to help you to learn to become more aware of yourself and transcend your identification with the limited ego self. The undoing of the identification of the ego self is the primary focus of spiritual evolution and is the enigma that has baffled even the most intelligent minds of history. And most of the films that are very popular in our culture represent the freeing of your identification with this ego. As one comes to understand the true nature of the mind, one becomes less controlled to the effect of its inner workings and better positioned to transcend to one's identification with it. The origin and destiny of the soul and the reason for its appearance on earth has throughout the ages been a theme of vital importance to humanity. And the doctrine of transmigration suggests that when the human soul does not aid the union of the personal consciousness and the lower principles with the spiritual aspirations, it is cut off from the contact of the true self.
Maybe there's a point where you're supposed to stop going on joyrides and start thinking about living up to your potential.
Please tell me you're kidding, Sue.
Look, we're now living in a world where at any moment half the population can just disappear. Life's too short and too fragile. Katie, you're a valet driver with an honors degree from Berkeley, and Sean can speak like 4 languages. You've always been the most talented people I know. I just don't get why you're scared to actually use it for something serious.
Wow.
You sound like my mom. You also dress like her a little bit too. Where's this from, Talbot's?
And the atom is defined as the center of force and made up of a central positively charged nucleus called a proton, surrounded by a cluster of negatively charged corpuscles called electrons and neutrons, which revolve around the nucleus in orbits corresponding relatively to to the orbits of the planets about the sun of our solar system, proving that the same grand plan of manifestation exists from cosmos to atom. And these rings visualize life force gradually raising the vibratory rate of the atoms into higher forms as Shang-Chi evolves.
"那是我第一次见到你的父亲。我从没想过自己会为他动心，但爱总是自有安排。上气，十环的传说啊，讲都讲不完。等你长大了，自然就会了解的。
And these rings transmigrate from the lower vibrations to the higher mental world of spiritual aspirations and longings for something more than the material world of the ego. There are millions of atoms upon which each soul has placed the radioactive imprint of its stage of unfoldment. The ego is the main hero/heroine in the inner movie of one's life until aware of itself. The fact that having a mind is an involuntary burden helps us with the realization that it is not a personal choice or decision. It is imposed and thrust upon us unasked. It is inherited as a human being, and everyone is a victim of the ignorance and limitation of the human ego until we become aware. Once the evolutionary structure and function of the ego is understood, its disassembly is facilitated by the inner decision to pursue that which is real and eternal, rather than temporal, transitory, and fleeting. Those who see life as a precious gift do not wish to waste it on that which is trivial and temporal. The ego can be thought of as a set of entrenched habits of thought, which are the results of entrainment by invisible energy fields that dominate human consciousness. And these invisible energy fields are visualized and symbolized by the 10 rings.
他打造了一支十环军团，千百年来，他们扫荡了世界的每个角落。
So the ego often looks like the light, and discernment is quite difficult.
他们潜伏于暗中，颠覆各方政权，也改写了历史。
If there was such a creature as the Antichrist or devil, where would he hide?
凭借着十环之力，他早已称霸千年。
If he were smart,
但他却还不满足。
he'd hide in spirituality. It would hide in the government, church, culture, entertainment, and in our own mind. The ego is the central processing and planning center, the integrative, executive, strategic, and tactical focus that orchestrates, copes, sorts, stores, and retrieves. When we get closer to the ego's tenacity, we make the amazing critical discovery that we are infatuated with ourself.
听过塔罗的传说吗？一个隐士的村庄，在那里，神主的功法代代相传，传说中的神兽和古老的法术还都存在。我要找到这个地方。
明白，我这就派侦察队去一探究竟，然后有消息立马跟您汇报。
我们现在就去。
This ego cuts ourselves off from awareness and our energy, which is feminine.
这世上再也没有可以让他征服的地方了。于是，他找上了我的家乡。
Our feminine aspect is pure cosmic energy from the creator, and our masculine world is the creation.
塔罗入口在哪？
我们村庄不欢迎你。
你好像不知道我是谁。
我不管你是谁，走吧，不要自找麻烦。 这点本事。
So our inner world, which is feminine, which is intuitive, creates the outer world, which is masculine, which is her creation, and the ego distracts us from this truth and keeps us focused on the outer masculine world and creates the illusion of an outside creator. And there is nothing deadlier than religionized ego, which you can see at the Vatican. And the ego is not an enemy to be attacked or defeated, nor is it evil to be vanquished. It is dissolved by compassionate understanding. It often takes the collective experiences of millions of people over many centuries to learn even what appears to be a simple and obvious truth, namely that peace is better than war, or love is better than hate. But the truth is that there is no such thing in reality as an ego. It is merely an illusion to release, so something far better can replace it. And like this film, the father represents Shang-Chi's mind, the intellect, the ego. His relationship to his father is his inner relationship to his own ego.
After my mom died, my dad started my training.
The ego fears the future and the specter of death itself, which is intrinsic to the ego structure. And the ego is merely a compilation of unexamined habits of perception, like a shadow.
From sunup to sundown, I was taught every possible way to kill a man.
The ego structure is not unique or individual, and is relatively similar with karmic variations in everyone. The variation from individual to individual is the degree to which one is enslaved by its programs. And the ego was inherited as an it and is actually an impersonal it. The problem is that we personalize it and identify with it as me, I, or myself. The ego is a self-interested animal, and unless we understand this nature and accept it, its influence cannot be diminished.
The ego is the worst confidence trickster we could ever figure, we could ever imagine, because you don't see it.
And the single biggest con is, I am you.
The problem is that the ego hides in the last place that you'd ever look, within itself.
It disguises its thoughts as your thoughts, its feelings as your feelings. You think it's you.
People's need to protect their own egos knows no bounds. They will lie, cheat, steal, kill, do whatever it takes to maintain what we call ego boundaries.
People have no clue that they're in prison. They don't know that there is an ego. They don't know the distinction.
At first, it's difficult for the mind to accept that there's something beyond itself, that there's something of greater value and greater capacity for discerning truth than itself.
In religion, the ego manifests as the devil. And of course, no one realizes how smart the ego is because it created the devil so you could blame someone else.
In creating this imaginary external enemy, we usually made a real enemy for ourselves, and that becomes a real danger to the ego, but that's also the ego's creation.
There is no such thing as an external enemy, no matter what that voice in your head is telling you. All perception of an enemy is a projection of the ego as the enemy.
In that sense, you could say that 100% of our external enemies are of our own creation.
Your greatest enemy is your own inner perception, is your own ignorance, is your own ego.
And the ego is the imaginary doer behind thought and action. It is the voice that implants thoughts and actions of duality, desire, and victimization. It always tries to hypnotize you that you are not enough and that there is always an enemy to be conquered.
By the time I was 14, I could barely remember what life was like before she died. That's how old I was when he sent me on my first assignment. I was willing to do anything he wanted.
And the fight scene on the bus symbolizes his inner battle with his own ego.
Do you
know this guy?
I know what you're talking about, dude.
Hey, what? Whoa. Get off of me!
What is wrong with you, asshole?
我不想惹麻烦。
那就把项链交出来。
You have the wrong guy. Does he look like he can fight? Come on, bro.
His own battle and temptation with negative thoughts. The human ego likes to pretend that evil exists out there and seduces its hapless, innocent self
You okay?
into it inadvertently falling into the trap of seduction. And the real temper is the ego's desire for gain, whether that be sensation, excitement, advantage, prestige, or the pleasure of controlling others. Think of all the energy you spend trying to fight these thoughts, this ego. Some even allow these thoughts to take over, and this is called social consciousness, which is below awareness. Understanding the ego's nature reveals its underlying mechanisms so that we may withdraw the value we innocently project onto it, thereby enabling spiritual progress.
Who are you?
The ego is not the real you. It was inherited as part of being born a human.
I told my men they wouldn't be able to kill you if they tried. Glad I was right. Let's go home.
And first, let's start exploring the nature of the ego and the mind, and the sense of the personal self, so we can be better prepared to transcend this misidentification. And the ego implies a negative quality, an obstacle to realization because of its linear, dualistic construction. And in psychology, the term denotes coping and survival skills needed to deal productively with the world. And the ego self identifies not only with the mind, but also with its content.
我知道你在生我的气啊，爸要来找你。不会再给你打的。
你不应该回来。
有的时候，我在练功，我闭上我的眼睛，就可以感觉它就在我身后。你有这个感觉吗？
没有。
I know what you're going there to do. I don't know what he's telling you, but Mom...
Mom's dead.
You 不要把我扔在这儿。
玲玲，我3天以后就回来。
My memory, my senses, my thoughts, my emotions, my property, my success, my failure, my expectations, my feelings, etc. And this identification presumes ownership and authorship. Thus the ego sees and believes itself to be a personal, self-centered entity whose mental content is more important than the truth.
You know what he said to me when he left? I'll be back in 3 days. And after 3 days, I went to our mom's shrine and waited. 3 days turned into a week turned to a month, and a month turned to 6 years. That's how long it took me to realize I didn't need him anymore. I built this place on my own. I didn't need you then, and I don't need you now.
The ego's addiction and survival are based on the secret pleasure of negativity, which cannot be abandoned until it is first recognized, identified, and owned without shame or guilt. One has to see that this is just how the ego, which everyone inherits, operates, and recognize that it's not really personal at all. We have to realize the grim satisfaction it squeezes out of pain is a poor substitute for joy. The ego secretly loves and clings to the position of victimhood and extracts a distorted pleasure in grim justification from pain and suffering.
On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair.
The satisfactions of the ego are more pleasurable and addictive than the preservation of human life, much less dignity. There is an inner satisfaction that is the payoff of self-pity, anger, rage, hate, pride, guilt, fear, and so on. This inner pleasure, as morbid as it may sound, energizes and propagates all these emotions. To undo the ego, one must be willing to abandon this payoff game with this grandstanding of emotions and repetitive rehousing of data and stories to justify its positions.
What does he want with the pendant?
Did America make you soft?
But your dad's on like a whole nother level. Is he gonna kill us?
Just nod, don't talk. He'll forget you're there. That's how I survived.
He always treats you like that?
Only after my mom died.
And this ego is created within all of us when we lose connection to our feminine nature. And in this film, that represents his mother and his heart.
可爸爸的十环那么厉害，你是怎么打败他的？
妈妈的故乡塔罗有一个神龙，它是我们的保护神，它将魔法赋予在了我们每个人的身上。等你领悟了神龙之心，你就可以做很多了不起的事情。
那你现在还有魔法吗？
妈妈离开的时候啊，把魔法还给了神龙，但是妈妈得到的更宝贵。这个给你，如果有一天你迷路了，它会帮你找到回家的路。记住了吗？
The Great Protector symbolizes the transmigration of the soul into pure consciousness, the balance of the feminine and masculine, which is like a heart of a dragon. And the pendant symbolizes the love from his mother, his heart, his intuition, and the way home to the true self.